issue over gold and silver is one of their key um, uh, issues, and it's certainly the one that seems to evoke the most. Um, I don't want to say support, but the most attention. It's one that people really take sides on. And I think it's hard for us to understand that in 2018 because we don't get overly engaged in discussions about monetary policy today. We aren't looking at, most of us, at what President Trump is looking to do with the money supply. Are we trying to expand the money supply or limit it? And maybe that's because in most of your lifetime, we've been in an expansive situation because after the recession of 2008, 2007, 2008, we shrunk interest rates way, way down, and they've been down for most of your lifetime. So anyway, maybe that's what it is. All right, I'm gonna back up. This is boring stuff. There's not a thing sexy about it. Give me your attention and I will try to make it understandable. As I discuss this, you will see why it was unfair to my students for all the years I taught economics. I hate economics. And unfortunately, I'm certified to teach it and have done it several times. Okay. What do we base our money on? Today in America, we base it on nothing. It's just out there and it's only worth what somebody will give you for it. That's it. Okay? But up until the 1930s, our money was usually backed by something.
Gold.
We know
or
that
silver.
during the Civil War, some of it wasn't backed. They actually issued some of those greenbacks, which are inflationary. Okay, but usually, who you need, honey? Jordan. Get your food, baby. Usually, during most of that history up until the 1930s, our money was backed by gold. And in very simplistic terms, what that means is if there's y'all remind me to do roll in a minute. If there's X amount of money of gold, if there's X amount of money in gold that the United States owns in reserve, they can print that much money. And when you get a gold certificate, which is a dollar bill that says gold certificate on it, when you get one of those, it is worth the same amount of money 20 years from now that it was worth the day it was issued. It's worth every dollar equals X amount of gold. Does that make sense? Okay. What that does is it limits the money supply. There cannot be a lot of money in circulation. Does that make sense? I'm going to start my own currency system. I'm going to start making holly dollars. And I'm going to make holly dollars on all the money I have in my treasury. Uh-oh, we're in trouble.
I have 4 pennies.
I have a $5. All I can issue is $5. 5 holly bills. Because that's all the money I have. And all of you people in here are going to have to just share the 5 holly bills.
That's why we had pennies.
Right?
I want them all.
There is only a little bit of gold in the world. That's what makes it valuable. And some other things. But basically, it is rare. And so we don't have that much money in our treasury to issue gold-backed dollar bills. Okay? So back in the 1800s, in the Gilded Age, nobody's nuts enough to want fiat money. There's that one guy, Jacob Coxey, that I'll talk about. But other than him, most people are not that nuts. But a lot of people want more money in circulation. Does that make sense? So they want money based on something other than gold. They want more money in circulation. So they say, let's base our money on silver. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This creates a divide between two serious, significant groups of people during the Gilded Age. People who have money want the money supply to stay stable. They do not want inflation. Does that make sense to everybody? They want the money supply stable. If I have $10 million today, I want that $10 million to still be worth $10 million 20 years from now. I don't want inflation. Okay? People who are borrowers want inflation. People who borrow money today want it not to be worth so much money 30 years from now. I told you all about my parents that bought their little house for whatever it was, $25,000 or $30,000 back in 1968. And their house payment was $89 a month, and they thought that was, they'd never be able to afford it. When they paid that house off in the 1980s, the late 1980s, that house was worth $150,000. $89 a month to my parents by the late 1980s was nothing, right? You all could make an $89 a month house payment. My parents, as debtors, benefited from inflation. Does everybody get that? All right. What segment of the population in the 1800s routinely has to borrow money?
Farmers.
Farmers are debtors, exactly. Furthermore, farmers are creating a commodity that they want to sell. What, honey? Of course, absolutely. Farmers want the price of goods to go up. Now, they're not happy when they have to buy a new wagon and the price has gone up, or when they have to buy a new horse and the price has gone up. But farmers love it when the price of wheat has gone up and the price of corn. Remember the farming gang?
Yeah.
You all loved it when the price of those commodities went up.
Yeah, and biotic cows been happening.
Exactly. But can you, even if you don't truly understand it, can you mimic the words I've said and write them down?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this becomes a big issue. The robber barons of the Gilded Age, or if you love Carnegie and Rockefeller and all those people, called them titans of industry, but those men and lots of other people, the wealthy, want a gold standard. They do not want runaway inflation. We have a very conservative set of presidents through this time. Let's look at our Gilded Age presidents. It starts with, if you say 1865, Andrew Johnson, and it goes up to, depending on where you end the Gilded Age, period 6 ends in 1900. That would be McKinley's second term. These are conservative men. Even the one Democrat in that group, who is it? Grover Cleveland, excellent. Even the one Democrat up there is a gold bug. He is a fiscally conservative guy. Make sense? The Republican Party, the party of begun as the party of the free soil, the party of Lincoln, has become a decidedly party of business. Make sense? Okay. All right. And then Grover Cleveland, our one Democrat, is also a gold bug. The farmers begin to feel during the Gilded Age that they have been left behind. I think you could make some great connections between farmers of the Gilded Age and people who used to work in manufacturing today. That the economy, the national economy, has shifted and they no longer have a significant role in it. What are things that create hard times for farmers in the Gilded Age? Will?
The railroad monopolies.
Okay, very good. Those titans of industry have consolidated ownership of big corporations, and the first big corporation was the railroads. Absolutely. There are a handful of people, and we know all the things monopolies can do. Trusts and pools and all of those things, setting unfair prices where the farmers are at their discretion. Lizzie?
Was there a record harsh winter?
Don't we know it? All Thomas's cows froze to death. So yeah, they had harsh
Actually,
weather.
They were stolen by Indians.
Oh, they were stolen by Indians.
That's even worse.
They have in the 1880s, there's some of the worst decade of weather on the Great Plains that you could go back and look. All of you, which is probably one person in here who read Little House on the Prairie books, you know the Ingalls family, I mean year after year after year, this family is just being deluged with, if it's not the coldest winter in recorded time, it's a drought, or it's a plague of grasshoppers that comes through and eats everything. It is bad. What else is a problem for the farmers?
still Native Americans in the Great Plains?
There are still Native Americans on the Great Plains, so that can be an issue. For whatever reason, the Native Americans get upset when people come and take their
Oh, I wonder why.
Overproduction of their own goods,
overproduction of their own goods. Why, Casey?
because then the price goes down.
Why are they overproducing? What's going on?
I don't understand basic economics.
Well,
The more money they'll make.
Well, for one part, I think, and some of them do and some of them don't understand basic economics, and they don't understand, they're just trying to make a living, and they've always grown corn. They live in Nebraska, for goodness sakes. What else are you gonna grow in Nebraska but corn, right? But what is happening are global forces. There are foreign competitors for some of these prices now. Argentinian cattle, didn't we read that in the Gilded Age, began to be competitive. Mechanization is going to lead to overproduction. Lots of people moving to the Great Plains because of things like Transcontinental Railroad and the Homestead Act is going to make too many producers of those goods, so we get overproduction. What's another cause of problems for the farmers? What else do we have? I'm sure we were forgetting something.
This is a quick question. Since all of the presidents are fiscally conservative, were there any like protective tariffs?
Absolutely.
Would that be
Absolutely. And so let's say that. Well, that's a great answer. There are protective tariffs. The McKinley tariff is during this time. It's William McKinley before he before he's president. And so the McKinley tariff is incredibly high. We know that farmers hate tariffs because of two reasons. Number one, farmers are buying those clocks and whatever else is being produced in England and France and overseas. So the price of the goods that they have to buy goes up. But what else hurts farmers? This was in the news last month when President Trump recommended a high protective tariff. Why else do farmers not like tariffs?
benefits the rich?
There is foreign competition. People can buy other places' products cheaper, absolutely.
Does it keep other countries from wanting to buy theirs?
Absolutely. If we are not buying British goods, they can't buy our goods. And what do the British buy from us? Corn and wheat and barley. Does that make sense? So the demand for farm prices goes down. I knew there was something important we were forgetting. Tariffs is a big one. They believe that the political system has left them behind. They believe that the United States Congress is headed by senators who are in the pockets of big business. And the Crédit Immobilier scandal gives credence to that. How do we select senators in the 1880s? State legislatures. And state legislatures are notoriously headed by the elites of that state. And so farmers feel like they're being left behind. There was a DBQ that asked you something about evaluate their grievances, their gripes. Be careful, because all of those gripes aren't the fault of the United States government. The government doesn't make a drought. It's not the government's fault that there's overproduction, right? So, what begins to happen out west and in the south and anywhere that's a rural farming community, these organizations start popping up. A big famous one that was real popular in the Midwest was called the Grange. It actually has a name that long, something about husbandry. Husbandry is raising farm animals and things like that. It's a long name. Hopefully the College Board would tell you the Grange. This starts off as an educational program. All the farmers would go in an area, say once a month, to the Grange. Yes.
Is the Grange like an acronym or just a nickname?
No, it's the something 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 of the Grange, or the
Grange
is part of the work.
Gotcha.
They would go and they would be like a monthly meeting, and you would learn about new farming techniques. The wives would go and learn about. They'd see a demonstration of the sewing machine that you could now buy through the Sears Roebuck catalog, and things like that. Well, if you get a group of people together who do the same job, they're gonna start griping about their job or saying how great it is or whatever. But they're gonna start talking business. And that's what happened at these Grange meetings. And eventually, politicians got wise to it in Nebraska and Kansas and South Dakota and Iowa. And so the politicians would show up and they'd say things like, I'm gonna help the farmers. I believe in Jefferson's ideal of an agrarian nation. And eventually, the Grange evolves into a political party. In between the Grange and the Populist Party, what's the real name of the Populist Party? The People's Party. And in between that are these farmers' alliances. Farmers' alliances were created in all of these rural states, and they were created from the get-go to be politically active organizations. Organizations of farmers that are going to try to get pro-farmer people elected. Does that make sense? Yes, no? And they were hierarchical. There was a National Farmers Alliance, there was a South Carolina Farmers Alliance, there was a greater PD Farmers Alliance, an Horry County Farmers Alliance. There may have been a Loris Farmers Alliance. Why am I not saying there was a Surfside Farmers Alliance?
Because there weren't farmers in
Because
Surfside.
nobody lived there. Exactly. There's a small community. If you're from the Burgess area down there, you know about that small community.
Myrtle Beach became a city in 1937.
Back last year in 8th grade, my history teacher,
Quickly.
we were talking about in 8th grade, we were talking about the Grange one time, and she gave me some misinformation now that I know it, but she was like, yeah, farmers were angry because they all lived so far away from each other and the singles couldn't find wives, so they used to go to the Grange meeting to find their wives.
I'm not saying that wasn't a social event, that you might not go to the Grange picnic looking for, but that was not the purpose. All right, where am I?
So it was basically like a union almost. Or the
Yes,
farmers'
it is
alliances.
much more like a union, exactly. Here are the things. Somebody close that door. I don't want it to get too hot in here, but it's noisy out there. Here is what, once the Populist Party was created, here's what they demanded. Here's their platform. Number one, they want the free coinage of silver. They want to use silver-backed money. They are silver rights. They talk about silver. And I'm going to talk about somebody in particular in a minute, but they want more money in circulation. They want, number two, government ownership or at least extraordinarily heavy regulation of railroads and telegraph lines. They believe that those should belong to the people. They want a direct election of senators because they believe the state legislatures are run by the elites and farmers don't have a voice. They want an income tax. Why?
Doesn't it allow people to buy products from foreign nations?
They want an income tax. It replaces the tariff as the means of revenue for the country. Does that make sense? And back then, they're thinking remember, we don't have hardly a middle class. The middle class is small back then. They believe that this is going to be a tax on Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller and the guy that owns, what's his name, Duke, in North Carolina, that owned the cigarette manufacturing company. All those people. It's going to tax the wealthy, and it will replace the tariffs. What else do they? Some of them want this weird thing called the sub-treasury. The sub-treasury, and this will get you a great grade on an essay if you can write about it. The sub-treasury was the British would call it a scheme whereby the government would build big silos, big storage facilities for non-perishable goods like tobacco and cotton and corn and wheat and things like that. And if prices were low, farmers could put their products in those sub-treasury storage facilities and wait until the price went up. In the meantime, the farmers need something to live on, so the government would give them low interest loans to live on while they're waiting on the price to go back up. And then when the price goes up, the farmers will sell their product at a higher price and give that, and then pay back the loan. Does that make sense to everybody?
Such a stupid idea. Like, so many things could go wrong.
So many things could. Some states try it, but it never becomes a part of the national policy. All right, let's talk about, yes, sir.
Weren't they for Cuba and immigration that stuff?
Y'all keep telling me that. I don't.
It was
It's in the Albert.
I want somebody to screenshot that question and let me look at it, because the only thing I can think of as to why they would. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't know it. And y'all, there's more I don't know than what I do know. So you see what I'm saying? But let me see that. Now, here's my thought. Why would farmers like the annexation of Cuba? It's agricultural. You know, they make sugar cane. They grow sugar cane there. That's the only thing I can think of, but it makes sense. Eventually, when they run somebody for president, they're going to be for some workers' rights, a shorter work day, some workers' compensation. The populists really don't care about those things, but they add them to their platform to try to get those northern factory workers. Yes.
And weren't they very against immigrants?
I don't know that. I don't.
It's what it says on the Albert.
Here's again let me try to make a rationalization for why they might be. Are y'all listening? They don't want a lot of urban voters and immigrants dumping into New York, Boston, those kinds of places gives political power. I'm gonna move on because I only have about 8 more minutes, but I will look at it and I will let y'all know. But that's my only understanding. I've been reading about the populists for 30 years, and those aren't things I normally see associated with them. Okay?
This is a question I probably should have asked at the beginning of this lecture. When you say farmers, you're referring to like the Great Plains, like family farmers, not like big sharecropping families in the South, right? Or were you referring to everybody?
Actually, we find that like the farmers' alliances in the Grange, they have things in common. And in fact, there are white farmers' alliances and African American, they call them colored farmers' alliances back then, right? And I'm getting to that in a minute. But no, this is something that should have, remember most people still are farmers.
90%.
No, not anymore, not 90%, that's revolution. But we don't have more people most people live on a farm until 1920 in America, over 50% until 1920. So lots of Americans are still farmers. This should have been a party that won every election. It should have been a party other than maybe in New York State or something. All right, here are some people we know. We know Ben Tillman from South Carolina. Ben Tillman, and usually today we study him because he's such a big fat racist, and we're like, throw up when we read about him. But he was popular at the time. Remember, African Americans have been disenfranchised. White Democrats in South Carolina vote for him in large numbers because he is a populist. He supports the small white farmer. He creates Clemson University for the sons of farmers because the University of South Carolina was run by the coastal elites. Does that make sense to everybody? You can write about that. You know him. And his use of racism to get white votes is
effective.
Stereotypical. It is common of the populist in this section of the country. It is very popular. Do y'all remember me telling you about Tom Watson from Georgia? He ran as a populist, and he was saying in Georgia for some state election, and he's saying, black farmers, white farmers, we've all got the same concerns. And they just about beat him up. His wife said you could make an omelet from all the eggs thrown at him. When he runs the next time as a Democrat, he is as racist as he can make himself be. One historian has said that these politicians during this time tried to out-N-word one another to see how, oh no, I'm more racist than you. That is horrific. Go and read Walter Edgar's, book on South Carolina history. I would loan that one to you, but it's on cassette, since I don't think anybody can listen to you, but it, could listen to it. I got more I got to say. Jot your questions down till I'm done. But you know Ben Tillman, you know the racism that's there. You can answer exactly why populism did not flourish. The other guy you know is Jennings Bryan, William Jennings Bryan.
Yeah.
William Jennings Bryan is a speaker for the populace. In 1896, he runs against William McKinley. McKinley is the Republican. William Jennings Bryan is the Democrat. The populists meet, and their big guy, Leonidas Polk, has died. They don't really seem to have a national leader, and they know that Bryan supports most of their agenda. So they say, we will latch on with him. And if this guy has all the Democrats voting for him and all the populists voting for him, surely he's going to win. William Jennings Bryan gives that most famous speech. It's one of my top 5 places I'm going when I go back in history, is to hear him give his cross of gold speech. We shall not be crucified upon a cross of gold, right? That terminology, and how brilliant is that speech? I mean, y'all have to study that in AP language if you haven't, because he uses, religious connotations. They had pictures of him in magazines of him with a crown of thorns, like Jesus, carrying his cross of gold, his burden to bear. He is defeated. He goes all over the country by train, gives that speech literally hundreds of times, wears himself out. What does William McKinley do to get elected?
Nothing.
Sits at home, has his front porch campaign where he invites the media to come in and hear his agenda. He has this guy, this will never be on an AP exam, but he has this guy named Mark Hanna from the 9th grader. This guy, Mark Hanna, who is running his campaign. And what Mark Hanna does is he goes to lots of these millionaires, multimillionaires around the country, and they give money to the Republican Party so that pro-business policies can stay strong, so that this William Jennings Bryan is not elected. Right? We have done away with the bulk of the spoils system. So you can't get out the vote that way anymore. All of a sudden, money matters in elections. And Mark Hanna of Ohio understood that. He is elected. They call this a watershed election, 1896, because it shows that nationwide, the woes of the farmers will not be important anymore. The only time our presidential candidates care about farmers is when they're trying to get in Iowa, the caucus. Once they leave that, you don't hear farm out of them again, right? Farmers just are not important anymore. It also shows the importance of money in political campaigns. You learned in U.S. government that the importance of third parties in America, where they can almost never get elected, is either A, they influence other elections like 2000, or B, they raise enough concern about certain issues that one of the major parties will take those on. And that's exactly what is going to happen. The populists die out for the most part after 1896, but as we move into the 1900s, the progressives, little p and capital P, are going to take over some of these ideas, and we are going to get direct election of senators. We are going to get the income tax. 16th Amendment is income, 17 is senators. We are going to get more regulation of railroads with the Hepburn and Elkins Acts in the progressive era. We never get the sub-treasury except in a couple of states. We do, however, in the 1930s get subsidies to farmers, and we still have those today. We're going to pay you not to grow stuff. And so we know that
Sherman Antitrust Act?
we get the Sherman Antitrust Act during this time, and it'll be given teeth in the Progressive era in the Clayton Antitrust Act. We get, under Woodrow Wilson's presidency, the Underwood Tariff, which is a serious reduction in American tariffs.
So I know, like nowadays, a lot of farmers are earlier, so they're in those states that doesn't have a lot of teeth in the elections. Why back then was that the same way? Like either a lot just didn't vote, or their states didn't have many votes.
Their states didn't have many votes,
Okay.
because these states, where now you had Irish and Germans coming into these states for decades. Now in the Gilded Age, you've got Italians and Poles and Greeks and Albanians and Russians coming in. And again, they're not coming down here, and they don't have money to move here. They're coming here.
Well, 'cause
And they're getting electoral votes and seats in the House of Representatives.
But then, if most people were like farmers or lived on farm, wouldn't that have just been misrepresentation?
Well, we don't really concern ourselves about representation, equal representation in this country. As long as we have, the United States Senate and the Electoral College. Something else just went through my brain I really needed to say about them. Shucks. It was something important, and I can't think of it. It went right back out of my brain. It was about the populist. Oh well, I guess it'll come to me later. We will go on. We do have a couple of silver acts of this time period. They're not really enough to satisfy the farmers. We will go off the gold standard for everything except foreign payments in the 1930s. And who takes us totally off of it? Nixon. Good.
During like World War II, when the farmers to produce, is there like a switch in policy where it's like, okay, now you're important to us?
Yeah, I mean, now politicians will always like suck up the farmers when they need to. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think I've said it implicitly. Let me say it explicitly. The number one reason that the populists do not succeed is because of race. The Democratic Party in the Deep South is able to sufficiently use race to keep white voters from voting in large numbers for populists. However, in some of these states, you are going to have state legislatures that are overwhelmingly populist. Y'all got to go. Please clean up around you.